Over the next several months, you're going to hear all types of things about so many of the different candidates for president in 2016 on the GOP side. It seems like everybody and anybody that's a Republican is trying to throw their hat into the ring and announce their candidacy and why they feel they are the ones to beat the Democrats and perhaps the Hillary Clinton machine in 2016 and be the next president of the United States. So over the next several months, we'll have lots of debates, lots of campaign appearances, what have you, and they'll start to kind of whittle down the Republican field. It's crazy to me just how many candidates there are, because in some ways it just shows to me how much disarray there is within the Republican Party, and this party doesn't know what the hell they're doing, because you've got so many people to the point where almost nobody is going to stand out. I mean, you're talking about upwards of 20 candidates where half of your damn field's not even going to be in most of the debates, or they're going to have to do their own side debates, or whatever the case might be. So you'll have the media will sit there and tell you, kind of point you in the direction of who they take seriously. Therefore, those are the ones that you have to take seriously. What I'm here to do is kind of sort through the BS and kind of sort through the pretenders and give you, at least in my opinion, at this time, in this case, 6 individuals that I think are the biggest contenders on the GOP side to win that Republican nomination for president in 2016. Doesn't mean I think any of them are going to win the presidency. Doesn't mean I think any of them should win the presidency. Doesn't even mean that I think any of them have a real chance of winning the presidency at this particular point in time based off of certain trends and patterns and projecting going forward. It's more so a matter of trying to sort through, again, the pretenders versus the contenders, the bullshit versus the reality, and kind of try to give you my insights into who I think you should be taking seriously or taking a look at, not as somebody to support and vote for, but the ones you should be paying attention to, and the ones that you can kind of ignore. Now, there are some big names that I think, frankly, are, at this moment at least, worth ignoring in this whole cycle. Chris Christie, I think, is one where a lot of people might have viewed him a year or 2 years ago as a more moderate type of GOP voice that could have appealed more to independent and moderate voters. Now, with some of the scandals he's had in New Jersey, he's dropping popularity there. And the fact that other people have done their things to kind of take some of the headlines away from him, I just don't see where Christie is that much of an option, at least at this moment. And granted, things can change, and things can change dramatically. But he's got a lot of work to do, a long road ahead, and he doesn't really fit the mold of somebody that the GOP establishment would be behind at this point in time. I would view him more as a legitimate candidate in 2020 than I do in 2016. I look at a guy like Ted Cruz. He's somebody that could surprise because he could go so far on the Cruz crazy train that he could sit there and really appeal to some people. But at the same point in time, I think there are going to be enough people on his side of the fence that have more appeal, and other people that are maybe on the more moderate wing or on a different wing of the party that are going to appeal, where Ted Cruz is going to really stick his foot in his own mouth, and eventually he's going to rub people the wrong way in the GOP, and that will be the end of his candidacy for all intents and purposes. So there are those type of people. You look at a guy like a Mike Huckabee. He's somebody that will obviously appeal to the religious right. He has some name familiarity back from his campaign in 2008, his time on Fox News. There's a chance there again, because if he can drive out enough of the religious right crazies, anything is possible, similar to a Santorum and what he was able to do in 2012 when he was the anti-Mormons, so to speak, not overtly, but kind of indirectly. He was the Christian option compared to Mitt Romney. That's what Rick Santorum became. He was willing to go more to the religious far right than a Mitt Romney. He became the anti-Romney candidate, similar to how in 2008 Huckabee was the anti-McCain candidate. And those are guys that it's hard to predict, and I could sit there and dismiss them. But there's always a chance that one of them could get hot, get some momentum, get the people buzzing, and they could surprise people with how long they stay in the race and how much of a threat they are in the race. But at the end of the day, I just don't see where the appeal is going to be for Huckabee this time. He has some issues of his own. And a guy like Santorum, it kind of feels like people have been there. They went down that road 4 years ago. They're probably not going to really want to go down that road again. And, there are many others, some names that maybe should be taken a little more seriously, but they're not going to be. They're never going to get their feet on the ground. Other people that you'll hear something about, guys like Rick Perry, but they have no real chance whatsoever, you wouldn't think. You wouldn't think. But anyways, let's talk about the 6 people, and I'm going to go in reverse order, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, in terms of who I envision, at least at this point in time, as the most serious candidates on the GOP side for president in 2016. Number 6, I'll go to Marco Rubio. In terms of his appeal, he's got some appeal with the Tea Party, even though when he stepped out on immigration reform, that probably hurt him quite a bit. There's a chance that he's had enough time. He's taken some of the lumps. He can let some other people kind of put their foot in the mouth. And you could sit there and build your bridge back to the Tea Party, which is at least somewhat important in the nomination process on the primary side for the GOP. Now, Tea Party does play a factor. Not on the national stage in terms of national elections. They do not. They become a hindrance. They can become a help and a big one on the primary scene at the state level for sure, and maybe at the national level. But he's a guy that has some Tea Party roots. He's also a chance for some GOP members to sit there and say, while we might not always like it, we do have to appeal to Hispanic voters, and a Hispanic candidate like Marco Rubio is probably going to appeal more to Hispanic candidates more than anybody in this campaign not named Jeb Bush. And understanding that this party doesn't want the Hispanic demographic to vote in similar numbers as the black demographic does, a guy like Rubio could have some appeal, including to the GOP establishment. He holds a lot of the traditional GOP views in terms of tax cuts and this and that. It's also a chance for the GOP to say, see, we're not racist. See, we can't have to have somebody that's white over the age of 60 that's paid their dues for 20 or 30 years. Here's Marco Rubio. We can change too, and I don't know how much weight that's going to hold on the GOP side, but it could give him some momentum in some states throughout the process. Number 5, I'll go to Dr. Ben Carson, somebody that I don't particularly like. But here's a guy that's not afraid of saying crazy and flat out stupid shit, which frankly, similar to certain people on the Democratic side in the primaries, it appeals to certain segments of the GOP side as well. They're going to view Ben Carson as a guy that's not afraid to say what's on his mind. And, sometimes outlandish and crazy is the best thing you could say on the primary side if you're appealing to certain segments. He's going to appeal to the religious right. He's got a huge amount of support on the Tea Party side. For the Obamacare haters, here's a doctor who would know better about the medical system than a doctor. And again, a chance for the GOP to sit there and say he's not the same type of candidate. We're not a racist party. We're more inclusive than we're given credit for. And skipped and whoop-de-woo. On top of the fact that Ben Carson does have some appeal for disenfranchised GOP voters because maybe they are tired of the same type of pay your dues types of white candidates or just candidates in general. And here's the outsider. When you look at the other candidates, in terms of the ones you take seriously, Ben Carson's one of the few that can legitimately say that he's an outsider and mean it, and people can actually believe it because he is an outsider. And those type of guys that can position themselves that way always have a chance in these type of primaries, not necessarily to win, but do well and make a strong showing. And a guy like Herman Cain, you saw this 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, excuse me. There was a period of time where he was polling as well as anybody. Eventually he was exposed, and then he had the scandal, and that was the end of him. But there was a period of time where Herman Cain was doing well. Herman Cain was getting a lot of attention. And part of it was because there was that appeal of him being a Washington outsider. It wasn't somebody that had been in the House or the Senate for 20 or 30 years. He was a guy that was a successful businessman who worked for the Fed and this and that. So they thought he understood fiscal policy and so on and so forth. But he could say more than anybody else really in that campaign that I'm a political outsider. I can come in and do things differently. I'm not bought and paid for, but then all this other crap. So, I'll believe it when I see it in terms of somebody of Hispanic or Black heritage being a GOP candidate. Someday, somehow, it will happen. But a guy like a Ben Carson, similar to Marco Rubio, could do well in this process. Number 4, I'll look at Rand Paul. He's somebody that could appeal to the libertarian wing. And while the libertarian wing probably isn't enough to carry you through, it is enough to keep you in the game on the primary side. He has name recognition, obviously, for the libertarian wing of the party through his father, Ron Paul, and with some of the things he's done as a legislator as well. But to certain segments of that party, Rand Paul's message of small, limited government and people controlling their own destiny, fates, and the states running the show does have some appeal. And this is a guy that's shown some courage in terms of standing up against the Democrats, but also against his own party as well. And in particular, for certain segments that sit there and don't like the NSA programs and what have you, Rand Paul has a good history of being on the right side of those particular issues. So for the Republicans that believe that the government should stay out of their lives and out of their business, a guy like Rand Paul could again have some appeal. Number 3, Donald Trump. People can joke about it. People can mock him. But until proven otherwise, he's a contender. He's a legit one, and he's a serious one on the GOP side. In many ways, as I talked about in a recent video, Donald Trump is the perfect GOP candidate. A white male over 60 with bad hair, who's very protective of big business, is anti-immigrant, anti-Hispanic. In many ways, he loves money. He has a bunch of money. Hates everybody else's ideas, has no really good ideas of his own. Donald Trump is perfect. He's absolutely perfect. And he's going to be able to sit there and leverage himself as a big-time Washington outsider and political outsider because he's the Donald. He's going to be somebody that appeals to people that sit there and say, hey, we need somebody with some star power. If you're going to go up against Hillary Clinton, you need somebody with some star power and some name recognition. And that's going to appeal to some. Again, this is a guy that in a lot of ways his views wash with the traditional GOP establishment party line. But he's also a guy that could potentially debate really well because Donald Trump's not going to have any fear. He's not going to have any muffler over him. He's not going to have any governor over his mouth, which potentially long-term will damage him and damn him, especially if he got into a general election where you'd probably get creamed. It could do him some real good on the GOP side, where these guys are kind of dancing around things and taking shots at each other, but not really taking shots. Donald Trump has that type of strong will where people are going to project good leadership skills on him and say, this is a guy that's been successful in the business world. If he runs the country like he ran his businesses, we'll be in good shape, minus the 4 government bankruptcies that we'll have. He's a guy with a strong will. He's going to debate pretty well, you would have to think. He's a guy that believes in himself, and that type of confidence is going to project very well. It could border on arrogance. It could border on rubbing people the wrong way, but some people might really like that. And with what he said about immigration and Mexicans, that's going to play pretty well with certain segments of the GOP. There is no question about that. Number 2, you got to look at the newest official candidate in the 2016 race on the Republican side, and that's Scott Walker. Here's the governor from Wisconsin who is in a blue state but has managed to win multiple gubernatorial elections, by somewhat decent margins, including a recall attempt a few years ago. When you look at Scott Walker, in a lot of ways, he appeals to a lot of segments of the GOP, especially the ones that matter. He's going to appeal plenty to the religious right, especially with his views on things like abortion. He's a gun fanatic and a total gun rights advocate, so he's going to appeal to the NRA wing. He's completely and totally anti-union, so he's going to definitely appeal to the Chamber of Commerce and other big business elements of the right. There's no question about it. And then on top of that, he is the choice of the Koch brothers. And these guys, with the ability to plunk unlimited money into presidential campaigns, they can be kingmakers, and that's a scary thought. This is a candidate that is bought and paid for, signed, sealed, delivered by the Koch brothers. And as long as he's going to have that big money behind him, and he is, Scott Walker is a legitimate threat. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to politics, money talks and bullshit walks. And Scott Walker will be able to raise money, and a lot of it because of the different segments that he really can appeal to. The religious right, especially with his views on abortion, the NRA with a lot of his views on gun rights, his ability to be anti-union is going to appeal to the business GOP establishment big time. Combining that with his funding from the Koch brothers, when you look past the fact that this guy says a lot of stupid things and he's not a college graduate, which may not play that well, Scott Walker is legitimate. And I would not be surprised if the Republican Party ended up nominating him for president in 2016. But at the end of the day, I think the number one most legitimate, at least at this point, serious contender has to be the next member of the Bush dynasty, and that is Jeb Bush. When you look at Bush, this is a guy that has that family lineage there. Obviously, his father was president, his brother was president. Jeb Bush has been the good soldier for the Republicans for many years. The Republican Party has always valued those guys that pay their dues, that have played the party game, have appealed to the establishment for years, and Jeb Bush fits that mold. Similar to how George Bush Sr. did when he ran for president in '88, similar to how Bob Dole did in '96. John McCain was kind of a sacrificial lamb in a way in 2008. Mitt Romney, while he hadn't paid all the political dues because he just had that one term as Massachusetts governor, again, he was somebody who's very big business that had a lot of appeal to the GOP establishment. You look at Jeb Bush, though, again, he's a guy that appeals to that establishment tremendously. Here is a guy that has been that good soldier, paid his dues, has name recognition, but doesn't have the same type of name recognition as his brother George W., which is probably a good thing for him at this point in time. There's going to be some thought that he's the most electable on the mainstream type of national landscape, especially if you're trying to envision him running against Hillary. And they're probably accurate. If anybody has a chance, at least the way it looks at this moment, to be able to contend with and beat Hillary, it probably is Jeb Bush. He's probably going to play well in certain segments of the South and Southwest because of his views on immigration compared to other members of the Republican Party. He will probably appeal more to Hispanic voters, similar to how his brother did. Much better, obviously, than Mitt Romney did in 2012 or John McCain in 2008. Here's also a guy that when the GOP is trying to piece together the electoral map and they're trying to figure out a path to 270, Bush still has a decent name in Florida. And he would be the most likely to beat a Hillary Clinton in a Florida, even including a guy like Marco Rubio, the senator from that state. So now all of a sudden you could take Florida and their 29 electoral votes and flip it to the red column, where the last two elections it went to Obama on the blue column. It's a lot easier to envision a path to 270 for the Republicans if you can bring Florida into the mix. And the establishment is going to look at that. And they're going to sit there and say, hey, we might need to defend Arizona. We might need to sit there and we have to win Florida to have any chance. But he's also a guy, maybe, because he's not too far off the deep end. He's got Republican conservative views, but they're not so extreme, and the way he expresses them isn't so extreme compared to others. He could potentially play well in places like Iowa and maybe other places like Iowa, New Hampshire. When the GOP is looking at this, in part, I have to believe they're having to look at how they can actually envision a path to winning 270 or more electoral votes in 2016. Marco Rubio is not going to get that done. Ben Carson not going to get that done. Rand Paul's not going to get that done. For all of his bluster, Donald Trump at the end of the day might not get it done, and he'd probably be the most likely to get creamed in a national election against a Hillary. Scott Walker maybe could get it done, but whereas he might be able to swing a Wisconsin red, which would be an impressive feat for him, he's not going to play well in Ohio. He may play well in Florida, but that's not guaranteed. When you look at it, Jeb Bush has the potential to flip the most blue states from 2008 and 2012 red. And that's what the GOP's focus, I believe, will be on, is that candidate that is the safest, that candidate that will be the most likely to appeal to the establishment, the candidate that will be able to salvage more of the Hispanic vote than anybody else that can be taken seriously on the national level, but that guy that could put Florida and a couple of other blue states into play for the red team. Because if they don't do that, the math doesn't add up well for the GOP come 2016. Hillary or somebody else on the Democratic side could win by similar or bigger margins than Obama did in 2012 or even 2008. So at the end of the day, things can change. And, there might be a video in a couple of months where I sit there and say somebody else is going to be that guy. But at this particular moment, based off of many different things, I would have to envision Jeb Bush as being the most serious of the GOP contenders and the most likely to win the nomination. But with the Koch brothers backing and his appealing to the religious right and the anti-union segment, Scott Walker is a big player and somebody that has to be taken very seriously as well, as does Donald Trump. To me, right now, if I'm handicapping the race, there's only three guys to really, truly take seriously. Rand Paul, Ben Carson, Marco Rubio might do okay in certain segments, especially if Ben Carson might play very well in Ohio with that first caucus. Rand Paul will play well potentially in both Iowa and in New Hampshire in that primary. But Trump, Walker, Bush, those are the three guys to take seriously. They really are. And what a scary thought that is for this country.